Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm your host, Verit Kogan, and I'm so excited to introduce you to a very special guest, Linda Miller. Since 1995, Linda Miller has focused on the expansion of coaching within the corporate arena. For the past 20 years, Linda has served as an executive coach and the Global Liaison for coaching with the Ken Blanchard Companies. And she has co-designed two of Ken Blanchard Companies' training programs, including Coaching Essentials for Managers and Leaders. Linda is a founding recipient of the Master Certified Coach designation from the International Coach Federation, also known as ICF, and has served on its international board. She is the co-author of two books and is a contributor to the Ken Blanchard Company's book, Leading at a Higher Level, and Marshall Goldsmith's book, Coaching for Leadership. In 2009, she received an honorary doctorate for her contribution to the coaching profession. And on a personal note, Linda and I have had a chance to meet several times now over the years, and I'm just deeply grateful for her friendship, for her wisdom, and her support for me personally. Linda, thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Well, welcome to our program. We always like to kick things off by asking you, how did you get into this arena?
I came out of the mental health field and I knew that there was something different and something bigger that would be impactful. And I was on a national mental health board and was invited to a retreat. And at that retreat, somebody came up to me almost on the first day and said, "I've been thinking about you. Have you heard about coaching?" And I said, "No, never heard the word, and except for, sports and things like that." And she said, "I think you would be really good with coaching." And so she gave me the name of her coach. I left for home on a Sunday. I called her coach on Monday. I had my first coaching session with him on Tuesday. And in 3 months, I pretty much outgrew him, and he knew it and I knew it. And I signed up to be trained. This was all in 1995, 96. And got my training and joined up the International Coach Federation. And I closed my mental health practice. I didn't close my mental health. That's still hopefully functioning, but I did close the practice and have been coaching ever since. And it's been quite a trajectory because I wasn't in organizations, and yet everywhere I went, people said you need to be coaching in organizations. And then when the Ken Blanchard Companies called me in 2000 and asked me if I'd interview, that was scary. And off we've gone, and I've been with them ever since. It's been a pleasure and a blessing.
So thank you for sharing that background, how interesting it is that things just tend to come our way, and new doors open when we're open to them.
Yeah.
So as you know, this is a podcast about mindset, and I'm really curious to hear your take on what a coaching mindset actually is.
I've thought about this a lot, and it's a different way of leading and managing and even being with people, because I think I've changed the way I'm with my kids. I've changed the way I'm with my grandkids. And I've definitely changed the way I've worked with people. It's a shift from always telling people what to do and solving and advising to asking and drawing out their ideas. So it's not always on me to make all the decisions, decide the direction that we're going to go, but it's really sharing that. And as a way, part of that mindset as a way of sharing and asking questions is to develop them and to draw them out and to learn what they already know. So it's really about drawing out ideas. It's about creating awareness for others, helping them realize that they've got something that they may not have realized before, and creating that awareness, helping them to push all the different experiences and dots, bring it together with new ideas. And so it's really developing people in a different way. I also think of it as, if we're telling people what to do, then we can't get away on a vacation very well. But if we're drawing out and developing people so that they can make decisions and come up with their own ideas, that gives us more freedom and almost more long-term time. So in the short term, it may seem like coaching takes more time. In the long run, it actually gives us time back. And that's the part of the mindset shift. Try to say that 5 times fast. I have said it wrong many times, but part of the mindset shift is realizing that I'm actually developing people that's going to help me to have more time for some of the things that others can't do. So there's a couple of other things that I have thought about. Part of creating a coaching culture, which is not what we're talking about, but it's part of the mindset, is helping people to learn from their mistakes rather than punishing, helping them to draw out of whatever has happened and make it something positive. And it's also about not making others wrong. And I hate to assume anything, and so I won't, but there are sometimes we actually make people wrong, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And coaching is about helping them be right and learn from mistakes and move forward. So the whole mindset shift is very, very different.
And would you be willing to maybe share an example of that mindset shift? And what I mean by that is some of the people that are listening might not even be familiar with coaching in general. Some of them may have been coached, or maybe they think of sports coaches, but so they're getting a good sense based on what you're sharing. But can you give us an example?
Can I give an example of when I was doing a training and the part of coaching is asking open-ended questions rather than closed questions. So can I give an example of that? Is that okay? So I was doing a demonstration. It was up in Canada. And I said to the person who was the volunteer, I said, do you have any ideas? And then I caught myself and said, that was a terrible question. And I turned to the class and said, that was a terrible question. Let's try this differently and see what happens, and we'll debrief it. So I turned back to her, and she was with her whole team. I turned back to her and said, what ideas do you have? So based on what we were talking about, what ideas do you have? And I said it genuinely. I hope that sounded genuine. So we went ahead and we finished the demonstration, and I said to her, what happened to you when I asked you, do you have any ideas? And she looked at me and she said, do you want me to be honest? And I said, yeah, that'd be probably good. And she said, when you said, do you have any ideas? The first thing that went through my head was, no, dummy. If I had ideas, I wouldn't be up here. And I'm thinking about how many times we ask closed questions, as we don't intend to cause a problem. So then I said to her, so what happened to you when I asked you the second question? What ideas do you have? And she looked at me and her eyes kind of went up and she said, that was the weirdest thing, because all of a sudden I realized I do have ideas. And I said, and all the ideas that we talked about? And she said, were mine, were hers, not mine, hers. And it was just a very small example, but huge ramifications. Because if I had gone off of the first question, do you have any ideas? She would have said no. She wouldn't have said dummy, but she would have said no. And then I would have told her. The mindset shift was catching myself. What ideas do you have? And there's an assumption under there that is that the person who we're talking with has ideas, especially people who are in senior leadership roles. But sometimes they're afraid to give their ideas and they shut down. And sometimes we ask the question, do you? That's a closed question, and we need to open those up. That's a very small example of the mindset shift, but you can see what the ramifications are.
Oh, what a beautiful example. And I think that we can all resonate with that, whether as parents or as team leaders or as friends, right? Where we where we ask those open-ended questions, because as you said, there's an assumption, a presupposition there that they have solutions. Maybe they just can't access them yet. They maybe need some support, but that we believe it's possible for them to solve their own problem.
Yeah.
And that comes with love when you think about it.
Yeah.
Rather than judging what isn't, it's being curious about what might be,
Yeah.
and really drawing out their ideas rather than telling them what to do.
Well, and it's also about focusing on moving forward. I was just thinking of an example that is a life example and a home example, if that's okay to share. When a child comes in and gets a lower grade than expected, maybe gets a C or a D or even an F, and what do we do as parents? Often, if we're not aware, we say, "Why did you get that D or that F?" What are they going to say? Because I'm stupid, mommy? What do they say? But rather, the coaching mindset would be, what grade would you like next time? How are you going to get there? What help do you need? How can we partner so that you can have the experience and get the experience that you want, which is totally different than making them wrong or focusing on the past. So, and that part of that coaching mindset is also focusing on moving forward, not just dwelling on what's happened in the past.
Yeah, and it's so interesting energetically as you were kind of sharing that example with the kid. I felt like, in the first question, kind of like going in, like almost like inward and becoming small. And then when you said, what do you want? What grade do you want? It felt like expansive, like, ooh, maybe I can have what I want.
Yeah.
And I imagine that energetically, it's a completely different feeling for the receivers of our communication when we truly embrace that coaching mindset. So how is this kind of mindset different than other kinds of mindset, let's say from as a manager, or micromanager, or as a mentor, or even as a therapist? What's different there?
I think a big part of it is partnering with, working with partnering with others rather than telling people what to do and having it almost top down, or even with colleagues telling them what to do. It's a different kind of partnering that's different. It's a way of honoring ideas and encouraging ideas. So there's a different level of trust that's developed as a result of it. It's encouraging growth and development. My husband worked for somebody, don't tell him I'm telling this, okay? But my husband worked for somebody a number of years. And that was not a coaching mindset, by the way. I was telling her what to do, which is stop working. Okay. So part of it, my husband was working with somebody a number of years ago, and it was very clear that person only hired people that were below him and that he could, in a sense, control. My husband worked for him, I don't know, maybe a year and a half at the longest, because it became so clear that the owner of the company did not want growth and development. So how is a coaching mindset different? It's encouraging growth and development. It's wanting people almost to be better, and sometimes even better than you are, which is a very challenging thing to say. I remember one gentleman that I used to know who worked for, 35 years at IBM, and every single person who came through, who was a woman or minority status, every single person who came through that was going to pierce the glass ceiling came through him. His whole focus was on creating growth and development. He was a coach. He had that mindset of partnering with them so that they could grow and develop, and so that they could get where they needed to go. It was really kind of cool. Whenever we ask people, what are the challenges to this? One of the very first things that they say all the time, and this is globally, by the way, they say, I don't have time. And we've actually come back and said, you can coach in the time you have. It's not how much time coaching takes, it's coaching in the time you have. 5 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even just a second to ask a provocative question that's going to help the person move forward. So one of the things is time. One of the challenges is control. It feels sometimes like we're out of control if we are asking people for their ideas, having them come up with, what they want to do. And it feels like a lot of people have said, again, this is globally, that it feels like we're out of control. Those are two of the big ones. Sometimes the people are, they want things done a certain way, and this has to do with the control. And actually, there may be a certain way that things need to be done. And in that case, coaching may not be appropriate. For example, somebody in HR who is in policy and procedure, if there's a policy and procedure that something needs to be done in a certain way, that's not when coaching is appropriate. But coaching would be appropriate if there are multiple ways that something could get done. And I'll give you an example of this. I was in Shanghai and I was walking up or down a big set of stairs in a corporate building, and somebody yelled, hand on the rail. I didn't know, but a policy in their organization, because it's a manufacturing organization, was that you never went up or down stairs without literally holding on to the rail. Now, if they had yelled at me, lady, how are you supposed to go up or down stairs? It would have taken a few minutes for me to get there because I didn't know about the policy. So even though the yelling might not have been needed, what was appropriate was for them to say, hand on the rail. And then when I got up or down, wherever I was going, the person said, I'm sorry that I yelled at you. We do have a policy about this. And I said, you know what? That was appropriate. I didn't know. So there are times where coaching is not needed. And so one of the challenges is knowing when coaching is appropriate and when it's not. So that's actually a challenge that comes up quite a bit as well. So time control, not knowing if the ideas are going to be good enough when they are shared, and then also knowing when to coach, when not to coach. Those are all challenges.
And I'm curious if you'd be willing to share, when is a time to coach and when is a time not to coach? So you've already clarified if there are certain policies or if safety is involved. Clearly, it's a time for telling, not for asking and co-creating. But what are some other criteria, I guess, that you might use to help people decipher that?
When a person has ideas and knows what the role is or what some of the options might be. So when a person has knowledge, they have skill, they have transferable skills. They have awareness and knowledge. When there's a need for innovation and creativity, let's look at these last 18 months, shall we? There's been a need for innovation and creativity. That's a great time to coach, especially if you have in place that we're not going to make anybody wrong and that we want to draw out those ideas. That's a great place to coach and to get people to really share openly. So those are some places when somebody needs motivation or encouragement. That's a great time to share and to coach and to offer encouragement. When someone needs support, they don't need direction, but they need support. That's a great time to coach and to offer and to find out what support is needed. Again, don't assume, but find out what support is needed and then make the connections, maybe be an advocate, make other connections to other resources within the organization. So again, if something is a policy, a procedure that must be followed, if there's a crisis, that's not a time to coach. I was thinking, I remember being at a really, at a big company. I'd like to say what it is, but I'm not sure that's appropriate. Up in Ontario, Canada, at the national headquarters, and all of a sudden the fire drill went off. And the person who was the senior person in the room said, "There's not supposed to be a fire drill. There's not supposed to be an alarm or a drill today. So we may have a fire." And then he said, "Out. We go out now." That would not be a time to coach. If there had been a fire drill and there was a need to teach people how to handle a drill, and we knew it was a drill, that might have been a time to coach because it wasn't an emergency.
Oh, those are excellent examples. And You've touched on the benefits of a coaching mindset as well, right? When we want to motivate, when we want to support people, when we want to really draw out their ideas, their insights to have more innovation, more creativity. What are some of the other benefits? Why would someone want to embrace more of that coaching mindset?
I think it's empowering. I think one of the benefits is to empower people. So it's not that I have to do all the work, but that I get to empower other people. It's about creating an environment for growth and development. One of the benefits is seeing people grow and develop so that in many situations you can start delegating to them. That's a benefit. And knowing that they are growing and developing because you're having open, honest conversation. There's another benefit. Having those trusting conversations and trusting behaviors so that there's open and honest conversations. Another benefit is drawing out innovation and creativity. Huge benefit. You just mentioned that a minute ago. Energizing people, helping them to be energized. If I say to you, you need to do this and you need to do it like this, 1, 2, 3. You're probably going to do 1, 2, 3. But if you're an expert in the area, it's energizing to say, so how would you do this? We need this done. What are your ideas for how to do this? And you're going to very possibly get better ideas. And that is one of the challenges. Can we handle somebody who may have better ideas?
Yeah. I imagine that's a big one. That's a very big one, especially in organizations where the culture is more fixed, where there's a certain way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And, having that creativity might be a burden.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, in times of crisis, sometimes when we have to adapt and be flexible so we don't, lose market share or, completely have to shut down at some point, is to be more open and curious and inviting to the new ideas. But sometimes it does take crisis, unfortunately, for companies to be more open.
Unfortunately, it does. And in those crises, look at what leadership can do when they invite new ideas and they actually include more people in figuring out the way forward that's going to be best through whatever the crisis is. I remember talking to a really good friend of ours who I think was at Intel in the 2008, 9, 10 crisis. And I remember talking to him after that and saying, what do you do at Intel when there's a crisis like we've been having? And I remember him just getting really animated. And he said, oh, that's when we develop leadership. That's when we look at what's ahead. That's when we create our differentiation for the upcoming years. And that's the partnering, drawing out, getting ideas. That's that coaching mindset.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I suppose, to everybody feeling safe, right? That culture where it's okay to fail. It's okay to try something that may not work. It needs to be adapted or even scrapped altogether. Because when people don't feel safe, as you know, probably from your therapy background, that they're probably not going to be willing to stick with the change.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Coaching through change is really critical. Really listening to what people are concerned about, hearing what's going on for them personally, what are their personal concerns, sharing what's going on. I have to say that the company where I work, our president has done just a fabulous job of increasing communication. And again, in a coaching culture, increased communication is so critical. He's been sending out a weekly email for 70 some odd weeks, every single week, and we've had a monthly meeting for an all company meeting. I don't know how many months we've had that to try to increase. And part of what he has heard is that people have questions, and they're serious questions. They're not lightweight questions. They're heavy questions, and they're creating space for those questions to come out. So a coaching mindset is also to say, let's hear what the concerns are so that we can address them. And so we can't always answer them, and we can't always say that we're going to do it a certain way. but at least we can hear the concerns so that people feel heard and safe.
And what you're sharing really aligns with some of the research from ProSci, change management methodology, as you know. So, how does a coaching mindset help us as leaders?
Yeah, I think one of the big ways is to build trust both directions. So it's not just one directional trust, but it's both directions. I begin to trust you, that I know where you're coming from, what you're thinking. You begin to trust me, that I'm going to be there for you. We're going to be able to talk about what we need to talk about. Part of it is being attached to the goal. I mean, everybody has goals. Let's talk about this honestly in organizations. Leaders have goals. They do. The board often hands them down, or leadership hands them down into the organization. But the part of what a coaching mindset may do is help us to address how, and actually not so much address, but open up the possibilities around the how the goals are met. So I may say to somebody who's a direct report or a team member, here's the goal. Rather than telling the person, this is what you need to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I may say, so what are your ideas for how we meet this goal? This goal is non-negotiable. The how is negotiable. And I think that's a critical way that the coaching mindset can be useful for a leader, is really detaching from the how, staying attached to the goal, detaching a bit from how, and giving a little bit more room for the creativity and innovation. And also one of the ways that this helps leaders is knowing that people are being developed. And I think we've probably mentioned that, I don't know, 7 times maybe already, but really thinking about development and staying in touch, and knowing that people are moving through development stages and getting better and better and becoming more and more self-reliant, in communication with the leader. It can be really beneficial for leaders.
And it's such a compassionate approach as well to, just to really be kind and patient with people when they're developing, because they might not get it perfect. And, the other thing that came to my mind as you were sharing that is, this challenge of control that you brought up earlier. If I'm going to be asking my team members, for the how, right? Here's the what, here's the outcome of the goal, and let's co-create the how. And let's say I've got multiple people with multiple opinions, but I'm attached to my own right way of doing it. How do you manage that, right? It just doesn't feel comfortable maybe to let go of your best way when you've done it that way 5 times or more and it works.
There's such a thing as natural tendencies. We all have them. Some of them are almost like blind spots for us. But really to be aware of what our natural tendency is, and maybe to take one small step away from that into something that's more collaborative, more innovative, that moves toward the coaching mindset. Maybe just even asking a what question, like what ideas do you have on this, rather than just starting with the solving and advising. Just a minor shift. And somebody, let's be honest about this. If you start to do that, there are going to be team members, maybe direct reports, maybe even colleagues, who are going to wonder if you fell out of bed on the wrong side of the bed that morning. If we're used to being told all the time what to do, and we go into our manager, our leader's office, and all of a sudden the leader says, "What are your ideas?" So it may be just some of the small steps that can help move people in toward a coaching mindset. And talking about intent, what's my intent? Maybe even prefacing the question by saying, I've done this myself. I've realized that I constantly tell you what to do, and I'm not sure that's as effective as it could be. So I'd like to start asking you some questions and drawing out your ideas and hearing what you think. And then we can talk about them. And that's, again, like you said, it's compassionate, and it communicates a whole different mental picture for the person who's receiving the question versus always the advice and solution.
And as I hear you, I'm wearing multiple hats, right? A leader hat, I'm wearing also a parent hat. And I'm thinking, how cool would it be if we as parents said to our kiddos, how do you want to solve this? And I know I haven't asked you that much before, but what do you see here? What's the best way for you to achieve this outcome? And what is the outcome that you actually want?
Yeah.
And it can be very transformative to help them embrace that kind of growth, positive mindset of what's possible.
It's fun that you brought that up, because I think this skill set and this mindset of coaching really fits into a lot of different parts of life. And I remember a gentleman that I talked to, and we had been talking about open-ended questions, and he had said, I think I ask mostly closed questions. And I think I said to him, how about practicing? Just find a couple of places where you can be intentional. Well, when we got on the phone the next time for our next coaching call, I said, how are you doing? And he said, oh my goodness, you need to hear what happened. And I thought, oh no. And he said, I was driving from Sacramento up to, I think, Tahoe. And he said, I was with my 16-year-old son, and I decided just to ask open questions. And I could hear your voice, and all I did was ask open questions. And at the end of our drive, it was several hours, my son said to me, this is a 16-year-old son, he said, Dad, that was one of the best conversations you and I have ever had. And the dad told me, he said, I never gave advice. I didn't solve. I didn't tell him what he was thinking was good, bad, or ugly. I just asked him questions so that he could think about it. I mean, this is the same thing that we can do with friends when they're in a situation where they need to move forward. It makes me think of a conversation I had last night where I started going into advising and solving. Oops, I think I may have to call and apologize. It would have, I would actually really have to think about how that conversation might have been different had I gone into questions a little bit sooner. At the very end of the conversation, I did say, so what are you going to do moving forward? We've talked about a lot of things. What are you going to do moving forward? And she came up with several different things and different ideas. This was not a team member. This was actually a 20-year-old. Yeah. So it fits in so many different ways, and we have to be really aware of our natural tendencies.
Yes, and it's often natural tendencies to help, to fix, to solve, to really demonstrate that love that we have in our heart. And at the same time, sometimes we care so much that we tend to forget that there might be some other ideas that might be even better for the individual, and they can access it for themselves when we support them and believe in them and ask them those open-ended questions. What other tips do you have? These are really great. What else do you have for leaders, for parents, for teachers, all of the above, to develop a coaching mindset?
Yeah, I think one of the other tips, and we've talked about it a little bit, is to when you have a goal or there's something that has to be done, to start thinking about giving space for different kinds of how to get there. So open that up a little bit and just be aware that other ideas might come in that are actually more effective and even more efficient. So it's not just solving and advising right away, but asking questions that can draw out other ideas. Another one might be, and this goes with what I was just saying, thinking about what can I do right now that would be empowering versus directing. So just even having a moment of, what do I need to do right now that would be empowering rather than directing? And seeing what ideas come up. This fits also with natural tendencies. If your natural tendency, as you just said, is to solve, then maybe step back and that you can always come in and solve at some point. You don't have to do it right away. Just hold back a little bit longer and draw out other ideas. The word else, E-L-S-E, who else, how else, what else, where else, is a great question when you're talking with people to draw out different ideas. So coaching is really, it's about allowing others to come in and to create and to solve and to be empowered rather than us feeling like we have to do it all.
Oh my goodness, these are such great tips. And when you said what else, it brought up an idea for one more. May I share that?
Mm-hmm.
It's what if? Like someone says, I can't do that. Like I can't meet this goal. It's just not possible. To just be like, well, what if it was possible?
Yeah.
And then just, be curious to see what might show up when we invite them to consider that.
Yeah, that's great. The what if, it fits with another word, yet. When somebody says, I don't know, you don't know yet. And then what if you did know? So just pulling that together. Yeah, that is great. The word, I've started using the word yet. And it fits so well with the what if. I can remember one of the most powerful coaching questions that somebody said. I remember where I was standing. I remember even what we were talking about, which I'm choosing not to share right now. But the gentleman that I was talking to said, and it opened up all these ideas. One word, and then silence. Actually, let's take that as a tip. What's another tip? Silence. We don't have to always have an idea. If you can tell that somebody's thinking, silence is a gift. And really think about it. So if you can get somebody who's an extrovert to be quiet and think for just a moment, I mean, that's pretty much a miracle. And if you give the gift of silence to somebody who's more on the introverted scale, that's a huge gift. So part of it also is not filling every silence. Can I give one more tip?
Oh, please keep going. These are awesome.
One more tip. And this is such a challenge, and it's so simple, but it's not easy, is asking one question at a time. Because a lot of times we ask a question and then there's a silence, and then we say the question a little bit differently. And then we call it stacking questions. And then we ask it again, but each time we ask it, it's going in a little different direction. So it's really hard for a person to answer. So ask one question at a time, and then let there be the silence.
And what if someone says, I don't know? What then?
That's okay. We don't know yet. What's one idea, one small idea that you might have around what we're talking about? What if you did know, or you did have one small step that you could take? What might that be? And being the compassion, I think, is really important. And you can hear the difference. I think I can feel it inside, the difference between that and saying, then here's what you need to do. Do this, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, very, very different approach. Very different way of partnering.
And I'm thinking during times of stress, which we're all especially feeling these days, or lots of change and uncertainty, is it harder, do you see, for people to really embrace that coaching mindset, like in the moment?
I think there's a lot of pressure on people and pressure on leaders when we're in times of stress. I can remember one organization where I worked with the CEO. This was a Fortune 100 company. I worked with the CEO and his executive team. And I remember the chief HR officer coming up to me at the end of one of the sessions that we did. And I remember he said, every single one of us at the table, every time there's a board meeting, which is once a quarter, it could be our last day at this company. So there is a lot of challenge and there is a lot of stress. So it seems like when there is challenge and stress, we really have to think about the short term, which is solving, advising, getting it done, versus the long term benefits, which may be developing people, finding new ways of doing it, taking a little bit more time rather than just rushing into something to get it done so that I can hold my job. And yes, stressful times cause us to, to behave perhaps more in our natural tendencies rather than thinking about really what are different ways that we can do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that example because I speak with groups of executives. This week I was with 3 groups in Chicago, groups of CEOs, and I always ask them, how are you guys feeling these days? And what I've been hearing, even this week, I hear anxious, overwhelmed, sometimes a little excited, but for the most part, overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, overworked, tired, exhausted, depleted. So I'm thinking if I were to train them on a coaching mindset during that time, if and I'm asking you kind of that question as a trainer of coaching, what could really help them to feel more ease to embrace some of these tips and tools that you're sharing?
Really to become aware, perhaps it's a really good question. Perhaps to become aware of what are the short-term needs and the long-term benefits of how I'm behaving or what we need to get done. So there may be some short-term needs that need to be met right away. And so it's both and rather than either or. And to also be aware of what are the long-term things that we need to accomplish as well. And to identify and maybe even to partner with some people and have some honest conversations about what do we need to get done and how are we going to do it fast. And I keep hearing myself saying and emphasizing and in conjunction with what we have to do right away. What do we need to be? What can we back off on a little bit or slow down or even expand using that coaching mindset? So there may be some things that feel more crisis oriented, but I do have to say, if everything is a crisis, everything is a fire, no, that's not good. And there may be some things that can help people to slow down. This would be where working with a coach might be really effective, to have a sounding board, somebody who can be objective and can maybe even point out some things that may be blind spots.
And this is why I think it's so important for leaders to be trained in how to be coach-like. And really embrace what you're teaching us today, because it can make such a difference, especially when someone shifts from an individual contributor to a manager level.
Yeah. One of the organizations that we have worked with, as soon as they had 80,000 people globally in this organization, and the minute that new managers were coming in, the first course that they wanted them to take was a coaching class, which I thought was amazing and very forward thinking, because they wanted, and they said, we actually challenged them on that and said, are you sure this is the right class as a first-time manager? And they said, we don't want people to develop bad habits. And individual contributors, as we both know, come in with a mindset of, I got to get it done. I've got to get it done. And I was blown away when they said, we want coaching to be the first class, a coaching class to be the first class, because we want them to develop healthy habits as they make this transition. How's that for forward thinking?
I imagine the culture of that organization was one of very forward thinking, innovative, adaptable individuals.
Yeah. And the coaching mindset was not what most of these people had experienced, either from their managers, sad to say, or their own. They really saw that it contrasted with their own natural tendencies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool point to bring up, because if we're inviting someone to consider being more coach-like, again, whether as a parent or grandparent or as a teacher, as a leader, if we did not receive that kind of coaching as we were growing up from a parent or from our leaders, if you will, then it's even more, I would imagine, a challenge because it hasn't been modeled to us.
No.
And we might, as you said, be coming in with some habits that we adopted, right? We were conditioned a certain way. So we got to break that pattern before embracing the new one.
Mm-hmm. So many of us have not had that modeled for us. I mean, really, have you? Because I didn't. I came into coaching as a solver and an advisor and had to really think about what I was doing and really shift some behaviors that were hard to shift. And even now I hear myself asking closed-ended questions a lot and thinking, wait a second, I'm a master certified coach. What's that question coming out of my mouth? And shifting it in the moment. Wait a second, and calling myself on it. That was a bad question. So yeah, we didn't have it modeled for us, I don't think.
Yeah. Well,
And
a lot of compassion, self-compassion, compassion for others, patience, patience, patience.
and a lot of laughing. Did I just do that? A lot of laughing.
And that's one of the great gifts that you've given to me as my mentor from very early on in my coaching career when we met, what was it, 8, 9 years ago and initially. And this idea that we're all growing and different priorities at different times, as you said, even during a crisis, what's most important right now, what's short term, what's longer term, and coaching in the minute, as you said, with the time that we do have. It could be asking one question, it could be just listening more intently, giving a little bit more of that space for people, really believing in them. It doesn't have to be a radical change of everything that we do. Those little steps really do make a difference, as your client experienced with his son in the car that day. So,
Can I share one more example? Can I share one more little example?
we have all the time in the world. Yes.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yes, of course.
There was I remember being in a training program. By the way, I've gotten permission to share this story. I remember being in a training program. I was giving the training, and there was a woman there who was the very senior leader in her organization and her immediate team. And we were what we were learning was just the skill of listening. Just listening. And when we were in the middle of talking about this, she said, "Why should I listen? I know what they're going to say." Okay, now don't forget, her team is in the room. And when we did a skill practice, I went over to her, and she was not listening. She was not listening. And I stood behind her, and I said in her ear, quietly, believe it or not, I said, "Hold back. Be quiet. Shh, just listen, just listen." And I was kind of whispering it in her ear. So she came up to me a little later. By the way, she had taken her jacket off. She was fanning herself because she was so uncomfortable listening. So she came up to me a little later, and she said, "I'm going to have to step out of the room for, a couple of hours. I've got a meeting, but I'll be coming back in." And I thought to myself, yeah, right. So she came back in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she came right up to me and she said, "May I please share something with the class?" And I said, "Yeah, definitely." And she said she was coming back from her meeting back to the room, and she crossed paths with a gentleman that she hadn't seen in a couple of years. And she said to him, "How are you?" And she said it genuinely. And with that, he just started talking and talking and talking. And she said she could hear me on her shoulder, which is frightening, saying, "Shh, be quiet. Just listen. Just listen." And she said she did. She just listened. And she was present with him and focused on him. Just simple. This is part of coaching. And at the end of the conversation, he thanked her profusely. And he said, "What you don't know is that I was on my way to turn in my resignation. But this conversation, it was more of a monologue. This conversation has helped me to realize that there's hope." And she said when she was in the conversation, quotes, she didn't say anything. All she did was listen. Now, that's just a really small example, again, of a behavior that can make a huge difference, is just listening. She said the conversation lasted no more than 5 minutes. And she had a whole different awareness of listening. Yeah.
That is a cool example because, as you said, it's simple, not always easy when we've got certain ways of being. And, with practice, 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 and a lot of patience for ourselves and others, we can get there. This example reminded me in resilience trainings that I do. From the Institute of Heart Math, we do trainings on coherent communication. And it's really simple in terms of getting coherent, setting an intention to really listen to the energy underneath the words of whoever is, you're engaged with. And sometimes I do in these trainings exercise where it's just a minute or two for them to really be in that place. And I've had people literally cry, adult men, CEOs, just cry and say, this is the first time I have felt heard in my whole life
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Yeah. We often ask, how many of you have somebody in your life who listens to you without interrupting? And sometimes there's nobody in the room who raises a hand. And then the next question, how many of you listen with the intent to understand? How many of you and can do that for just a couple of minutes without interrupting? And sometimes no hands go up. It's such a simple skill, and it's part of that coaching mindset.
So it's so clear, Linda, that there are infinite benefits to being more coach-like, first and foremost with ourselves. Asking all of those questions, embodying all those tips for ourselves, giving ourselves some quiet time and listening to what shows up to our intuition, from our intuition, and allowing us to stumble and fall and make mistakes as we adapt to things, and and of course to others. How magical will it be when kids grow up believing that they are worthy of being listened to, that they get to express their true essence, and that they won't be punished for it.
Yeah. And they get to express their ideas, and they're not going to be punished for it. And they get to actually contribute by sharing a different perspective. Yeah, really different.
Lots of new solutions will solve our big problems in this world without a doubt. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you, Linda. Once again, I adore you as a human being, as a mentor for me, and I thank you for sharing from your wonderful experiences and expertise with us today.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure. Thank you.